大家好, I'm Bala from Bala Simple Chinese School. If you are a beginner, intermediate, advanced, looking for HSK study, business Chinese, or simply want to improve your everyday communication, I'm the teacher for you. Come and join me for a free travel class at Bala Simple Chinese School.
Hello everyone, Craig here. Welcome back to Season 4 of Tell Craig Your Story. I've taken a couple of months off. We're going to talk about that in the later podcasts. I've been to the US and Canada, and we've got some really exciting podcasts to come. Today we'll be speaking to Mitch Hughes. Now, Mitch is most recognised for being the sports presenter and the sports journalist for NBN News TV in Newcastle, Australia. Now, after 24 years of working with NBN, Mitch decided to hang up his boots and we take a deep dive into his sports journalism and the amazing people that he's met and interviewed in his career. And Mitch is now currently working with the City Council as a media advisor. But before we go, please go to our website where we're at Podbean. Tell Craig Your Story at podbean.com. You can find us at Tell Craig Your Story. We also have a YouTube account. Make sure you're subscribing to get all the latest updates. And make sure you're giving us a like. We also have VK for our Russian listeners and WeChat for our Chinese listeners. All right, here we go. This is my chat with Mitch Hughes on Tell Craig Your Story podcast. Hi, Mitch. How you going tonight?
Good, mate. How are you?
Good, thank you. Tell us a bit about what you're doing now. You have a new job after a very long career with NBN. So tell us what you're doing right now.
So I'm into my fourth week as a media advisor with the City of Newcastle, probably better known as Newcastle Council. It's the media and stakeholder relations team. It's essentially the other side of the fence. As people in media, one or the other essentially these days, you're either a journalist or you're in media relations. So for me, it was just all about at 45, I definitely was ready for a change. 3.5-year-old twin boys, Harvey and Harrison, and my wife's a palliative care doctor, and we were just unfortunately finding that since the boys had been born, you know, she might leave for work at 7 o'clock in the morning and I was getting home from work at 8 o'clock at night, and we just weren't having any time together as a family, and I was just missing so much. You know, getting home at 7:45, you miss, you know, after school, dinner, bath time and all that sort of stuff, and then when you get home, you see the boys for about 10 minutes and then they were in bed. And it hit home pretty hard when Laura said to me one day when we dropped the kids at school at childcare, she turned to me and she said, "Oh, boys, say goodbye to Daddy. Say you'll see him tomorrow." And it was like 20 past 8 in the morning. So
oh dear.
It was a pretty big shock to think, yeah, you're about to spend the next like 22 hours not seeing them. So my father, who you knew, he passed away just over 2 years ago now. And yeah, one of the cameramen at work who was a bit older, who was probably in his 50s, when I was talking about Dad, he just said the thing that always stuck out to him was that the thing that you think of when somebody passes away is what you'd like to get back is time. So, you know, you can't replace time. So if you didn't spend enough time with that person, you know, you wish you could have spent more. And Dad definitely put, you know, time into us. You know, he coached, you know, cricket teams and football, soccer teams, and he took us to karate and he took us to camping and surfing and fishing and taught us how to play golf. And you just think back and think, you know, the memories you've got are worth so much more than if your dad ever, bought you a car or bought you a surfboard or something like that. So knowing that was the case and knowing that my boys were about, 2.5 at that stage, I just started looking for another job. And the council job's it's in this day and age, it's just a lot more manageable. It's Monday to Friday, it's 9 to 5. There's work from home opportunities if the kids are sick. There's just so much more work-life balance. And I think after 24 years of working in the media, which is a little bit more go, it's been a nice change. And I'm still getting used to it, though. It's really hard. I kind of describe it as being like the captain of, like a Premier League football team like Manchester United to going to being the water boy for like a 4th division or Wrexham, something like that. So,
right, yes.
Yeah, at this stage, I'm still learning how to not be the boss and how to not be, the face of everything and how to not be the main person in my department, and just actually learning how to ask questions again and how to learn, I guess. Yeah. Learning how to learn, because I pretty much knew everything where I was. So, yeah, that's been a big change.
That's a good thing for you in your personal career, right? Learning new things, of course.
Absolutely. It is interesting seeing things from the other point of view. Like I'm a pretty proud, passionate, Novocastrian. For people watching that don't know what a Novocastrian is, obviously they might, because Craig's originally from here. But yeah, basically people from Newcastle, it's a pretty special place. And, people that are from here are passionate about the place. And it's nice to work somewhere where you actually get behind the scenes to see what projects are happening. And, there are things going on that I'm sort of looking at from behind the scenes. And, they're upgrading the Newcastle Ocean Baths. They're upgrading the Newcastle Art Gallery. They're doing all these really nice projects around the city, and I get to be part of publicising those. So it is a very big change from being a journalist, but at least I feel like I'm still involved in things that I'm passionate about.
Yeah, absolutely. And just talking about going back to Newcastle and how every time I go back there, it just seems to have something better, especially in town, in the city, the V8 supercars.
Yeah, absolutely. You might remember there's an old building in town that kind of looks like a McDonald's ice cream cone. That was the old council building. It's now a 5-star hotel with a rooftop restaurant that's got panoramic views of the city. It's across the road from Civic Park, so it's got these beautiful views of like the really nice park with the fountain. They've redone all the facade on Town Hall, 4-star hotels lined up along the street. The Honeysuckle development is massive, and the city's definitely changing. And probably not as fast as some people would like in terms of, more public transport and, another bigger entertainment centre and stuff like that. But, things are gradually happening, and definitely happy to be part of all that sort of stuff and, being still involved.
Great to hear. So before that, you were the face. Like every time we used to sit down for dinner and I wanted to know about the Newcastle Knights or the cricket scores, that was you.
Yeah.
So tell us, you told us about the decision for leaving, but
yep.
I saw the video of your sign off, as they said. How difficult was that for you? Like, you're with your family, you're getting all this praise. So tell us a little bit about that day.
It was really emotional, actually. And it's interesting because just today I was looking at the Newcastle Herald website for another story that related to Newcastle Council. They've actually got the article that I did with the Herald about leaving on their front page at the moment, which is a couple of weeks after it went into print. But they also have the video of my last night, and I don't know, I was just scrolling and I just end up playing it just to have a look. And yeah, it still gives me a little, well up sort of moment. Yeah, it was really emotional because that 23 years, I went from being a 21-year-old. I walked in there 2 weeks after I turned 21 to have my first shift as an editor. And from 21 years old, being a 4-hour-a-week editor of tape footage, to go from that in 1999 to, journalist in 2004, moved to the Gold Coast and Byron Bay for 2 years, came back and then just kept being in the right place at the right time, got promoted to doing extra duties, extra responsibilities as a news reporter, and then the sport reporter. And it was just, again, Jim Callanan, who was the long-serving weekend sports anchor. Jim got a job in Sydney in 2011, and I was chosen to take over the weekend gig. And,
right.
that led me to be Friday to Tuesday and reading the bulletin on the Saturday and Sunday night. And then Mike Rabbit, the legendary anchor, was Monday to Friday. And then in 2014, late 2014, he announced he was retiring. And so I took over from him in early 2015. Yeah, I mean, I think it was because I felt like I'd grown up there, like you go from being 21 when you first walk in to being 45 when you walk out. It's a massive shift. And like the friends I've made there, even like there was a cameraman that was there who was, when I was 21, he was probably 45. And unfortunately, he ended up getting cancer and he died. And they named an award after him and everything. But like I was so close to him when I was there that I used to call him Dad, nicknamed him Dad because he was like a second dad to me. And just to have someone like that and to leave behind that life, it's a pretty overwhelming feeling. And but it was amazing. Like I had a farewell with the current work colleagues on the Friday night, and then I had a farewell with all of my former colleagues on the Saturday, and it was just great to catch up with so many old friends who I'm still friends with. And it was just so nice to talk to people and realize that I've made these friends and they're still in Newcastle, most of them, and we're still catching up. And but it's such an amazing industry. Like I've now got friends who are journalists in Adelaide or Cairns, or cameramen in Melbourne, or journalists in Melbourne, or they've moved on to do PR in something else. Like, honestly, that was one of my selling points for trying to get another job, was that, the contacts I've got extend the length and breadth of New South Wales, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide. And, even one of my best mates who we went to uni together, he's the news director of SBS World News in Sydney now. And but he's just a mate. Like I used to fly to London and sleep on his couch because we were mates at NBN and he was a sport reporter as well. So it's an incredible industry, and it's definitely one that has a lot of camaraderie when you're in the trenches with people, and when you're working hard and getting paid not much at the time. So it's definitely an industry that's created a lot of lifelong connections and stuff like that, and not just with the cameramen and the journos, with the athletes as well. Like I've ended up becoming close with, like it was amazing to me. Just I keep describing it as this, this little kid from Katara. I announced I was leaving, and then it started getting put in newspapers and magazines and all that sort of stuff, and on air. And I was getting text messages from, a guy that used to play in the English Premier League who I'd interviewed a few times, who was like, sad to see you go, always a great dude. And a guy that now works for FIFA who's in Switzerland sent me a message saying, always a pleasure. And I just got so many amazing messages from people and so much amazing feedback. It was so special to do that. But also, honestly, the nicest thing for me has been stepping away from such a high profile role, knowing I was doing it for the right reason. I'm not regretting it. Like I'm not sitting here thinking I miss talking to the Newcastle Knights, the Newcastle Jets, Cricket Australia, Cricket New South Wales every day, Golf New South Wales, all this sort of stuff. I thoroughly enjoyed everything I did, but I'm happily home for dinner every night, and take the boys to school every day and pick them up every day. And I mean, even this Newcastle Jets jersey is literally signed by the entire squad. They gave it to me on my final day, and I also have a Newcastle Knights one that they gave to me on my final day. And the whole team in that video on the news, that was them all thanking me and saying goodbye. So it's just it was incredible. And to think about how much of a part of my life it was, it was very emotional, very overwhelming. And to have my boys and my wife there on the set, it was huge. And as I said, some of those people are really, really close, like Natasha, who was sitting there as like a big sister to me, the woman that was reading the news. So and has been. She's mentored me since I was like 24. So it's just amazing to sit there at 45 and feel like, that was just a friend saying goodbye. Well, not goodbye. That was the hardest thing too. I wasn't saying goodbye to everyone. I was just saying thank you. So
see you later.
Exactly. See you soon.
Yes. While you were talking about that, I just wanted to ask, like you said, Mike Rabbit, he seemed to be like the person that when I was growing up, he was the man for the sports. And then I used to play baseball, so I played against him. Was there any sort of pressure to take his spot in the news, or was he helpful? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, Rabs was incredible. Like as a guy, there's that old saying, never meet your heroes. Absolutely. Yes. I believe that is true 50% of the time, and I believe it's the exact opposite the other 50% of the time. I think there are some people I've met who I'm like, oh, I really shouldn't have ruined my image of who you were.
Yes.
But Mike 100% is not like that at all. He was supportive to the point where when I announced I was leaving and it popped up on Facebook, Mike Rabitt and his wife Susan were traveling through Europe, and Susan jumped on and said, "Hi, Mitchy, it's Susan. Mike just wanted to say congratulations on everything you did. What a great effort. So proud of you, and he can't wait to see you when he gets home." And it was just, it was just lovely. And like when Mike announced his retirement, there was no pressure from him. He never thought you were trying to steal his job. He never thought that you were putting pressure on him. It was always a team camaraderie situation. There was definitely pressure from management when I took over from him in terms of watching the ratings and worrying that him leaving was going to have a huge impact on ratings, but it never really did.
Yeah, absolutely. And while we're on the topic too, the Knights, fortunate they got beat last weekend, but what a run. Some were doubters halfway through the season where they were on the table, but even though they didn't win the grand final, what a great end to their season.
Yeah, it was. And it reflects on the city too, just in terms of how much people wanted something to cheer about, because 2001, the last time the Knights men won a grand final, I think it was something like 2012, 13, 14, around there when Wayne Bennett was coaching, that they got within one game of the grand final. Got beat by the Roosters, I think, in the preliminary final. But yeah, and especially like being over there a lot and just knowing that it's actually a really good group. Like the crop at the moment, there's been some times when you get over there and you don't know whether or not it feels like it's got any real team sort of camaraderie or anything like this. But the current group really does seem like it's actually quite strong, is a solid team unit. So it was nice to see them turn those results around and actually, put 10 in a row on the board. And look at the crowds, like 3-4 weeks to go, and they had sellout crowds for regular season games and then, for a semi-final. So, yeah, disappointing they couldn't go any further, but, fingers crossed, I guess it just gives momentum to go into next season and they actually can build on it.
Absolutely. Yeah, all the best for the Knights. So let's go back into your history. You were born at the Mater Hospital, I do recall. And funnily enough, I was also born in the Mater Hospital as well. So growing up in Wallsend?
So mum and dad were both Wallsend. They were both born and raised in Wallsend. And then I don't know why, but they both just had this idea when they got married that they just wanted to move out of Wallsend. Everyone else stayed. All of mum's side of the family stayed and my dad's parents stayed. But yeah, mum and dad wanted to move out. So they bought a terrace in Cooks Hill in about 1971 or 2. And they lived there for about 5 or 6 years in their 20s. And then, I think dad was about 28. Mum was 28. Dad was 29 when they had me in 1978. So, and we lived there for about 3.5, 4 years. My brother, Brody, was born in 1980. And then I think when he was about 18 months old, we moved to Katara South. Yeah, I think the reason we both ended up playing sports in Wallsend, especially cricket, was more because of the connection with the family, just because my grandfather was obviously heavily involved in sports in Wallsend. Yeah, I think just Pop, that was just him, because Wallsend had such a good cricket program and still does. Yeah, that was just probably his encouragement. And so when we both, I think, turned 10, we got out to, or 10 or 11, we both got out to Wallsend. But yeah, born and raised Katara from probably 4 through to about 22 until I moved to England. So Katara South was junior football but cricket was Wallsend.
Wallsend. Even going back further, our grandfathers as well, to I would say actually pretty famous names in the Wallsend history of soccer. I know my grandfather, but he had the most consecutive wins, 9 or 10 year period, undefeated. So I don't know if that still stands the test of time, but he was very, very proud of that. Always talk highly of your grandfather as well. So tell a little bit about that, your grandfather as well, Mr. Frame.
Yeah, so Pop was a bit of a sporting freak, to be honest. Growing up, he was definitely someone that not only could play but wanted to teach you how to play as well. Pop was actually an incredibly good footballer. Pop played a couple of B internationals for Australia.
Yeah, right. Wow.
He played against a couple of small nations that weren't classified as A nations. So I think it was like when they played friendlies against, like say Vanuatu or someone like that. He played for New South Wales a bunch of times. Johnny Warren, the famous football commentator, actually signed a book for my uncle once that said, "To my childhood hero, Bob Frame, my favourite player." So, which was we were blown away. And then, unfortunately, Johnny passed away, died from cancer before we got a chance, because when I started getting a bit of a profile in media, I always had this dream of meeting Johnny Warren and reintroducing him to Pop. But then, unfortunately, Johnny passed away before I got that chance. But then, yeah, Pop also... I think the list was pretty extensive. He played A-grade tennis. He played cricket for Newcastle, played first grade for Wallsend. He played top grade table tennis. He played golden oldies for Australia when he was like 50 or something like that. Didn't realise he had a broken hip and persevered with that for 2.5 years because he was mad, and ended up becoming a accredited coach and ended up coaching. I think I saw some newspaper clippings at my nan's house once that said he coached Vanuatu at one stage. He did a coaching clinic for a coaching program for the country of Vanuatu, and he coached all over Newcastle and within New South Wales. And apparently when he was probably in his early 20s, he was offered a contract at a Scottish side in the Scottish League. The only thing that stopped him was that I think my mum had been born by then.
Right.
Because his father and mother were both Scottish, and but they'd come over on a boat, and he was born in Australia, so he was had Australian citizenship, but his parents both had Scottish citizenship, obviously. And he was contacted by a Scottish club, and he had to weigh up that decision. Do I move to Scotland and go and play football over there, or do I stay here in Australia? Because I think he had a business at that stage, a service station in Wallsend. I think it was just this big decision, and in the end he stuck and decided to stay in Newcastle. So for me, I guess that is pretty lucky, because it means I still exist. But gave up that opportunity. But I guess, professional football in Australia wasn't really a thing, in the 50s. And, in the end, I think he was still able to play his football, So, just an unbelievable sports person and practice and perseverance. I think probably the biggest compliment he ever gave me, he didn't give much away, Pop, but he was drunk once, and he said to me, he'd had about 7 middies, and he said to me once that he thought if I'd have been able to persevere with soccer, that I would have been much better than he ever was. And I just thought, oh, wow, thanks, Pop. So
a big call.
Yes. So I didn't know whether he was drunk or just because he was in front of people and he was trying to show off about his grandson. But I never quite reached his heights. Played a bit of first grade Premier League, sort of far north coast, but never played anything higher than that. Played some decent stuff, but again, work and uni and everything else got in the way. So, but he was a legend, Pop, and he was very committed to trying to help us, and coached my football teams and coached my brothers, and would give advice for cricket, and would take you out playing golf and stuff like that. So he was a legend, Pop.
It just seemed to be the normal thing. You'd be playing all these different types of sports. I think it may have gone away a bit now. So with kids that they want to play computer games, and they want to play their iPad a bit more. But soccer, cricket, the girls that play netball, just whatever sort of sport you could play, at least with my family and with your family, we were doing it, right?
Absolutely, and that's all we pretty much did. I mean, if we went to our other grandfather Pop Hughes' house, that's all you did. You spent all the day in the backyard, played cricket, played rugby league, rugby union, soccer, golf, tennis, badminton, whatever we could play, we played it. So there wasn't a lot of time, I guess. It's funny because we probably could have watched TV for 6 hours and Pop wouldn't have cared, but we just didn't. We just liked being in the backyard. So, but it helped me, I guess, having a brother who was similar age and similar skill, and we both wanted to do all those sort of things. So yeah, it definitely helped that it was the two of us and we could do those things together.
Yeah. Who were your sporting heroes at that time?
It's interesting, because I guess growing up, we didn't really have people in football, soccer, that we actually knew in that sense, because we didn't really have much of a league in the 80s and 90s. You didn't really know people as much. I mean, you kind of only really knew who Pele was and who Maradona was and that sort of stuff. You didn't really know too many people. So to be honest, as a teenager, I probably didn't really have sporting heroes as such. Maybe Merv Hughes, because his last name was Hughes.
Yeah.
But to be honest, my first sporting real heroes was, I think I turned about 14, what was that, 92, 93. So probably about 15. An auntie of mine gave me a magazine when Michael Jordan retired. Oh. And for some reason, I just became obsessed with the NBA, and the Chicago Bulls became my team. My brother became obsessed with the Utah Jazz. So that was convenient, because for the next 4 or 5 years, it was just the Bulls and the Jazz.
Yes.
And we just loved it. We lived and breathed it. We got a hoop in the backyard. We had, hoops at school. We had hoops. We'd play basketball 2-3 nights a week. And
there you go.
I think the sporting heroes kind of changed from the traditional rugby league, cricket, soccer, because I probably liked the Balmain Tigers when I was, 10, 11, 12, because I was the Katara Tigers. So I picked the Balmain Tigers.
Yes.
Again, not really sort of obsessed with it, liked watching it. But then all of a sudden, got to 13, 14, 15. And basketball just absolutely took over. And then probably towards a little bit 17, the Premier League took off in 92, 93. And I think I was pretty heavily keen on the Premier League after that too, just because at that stage, I think that was the era of the David Beckhams and the Michael Owen, and the Premier League really took off as a massive vehicle for entertainment. And in Australia, you'd get an hour highlight show on ABC every Tuesday night or Monday night or something. And, you only had 4 stations to choose from. So that was pretty much all that was on. But can't really say there was anyone that I would have thought, until Jordan. I had his posters on the wall and all that sort of stuff. I think in those days it felt a bit more accessible too. Like the New South Wales cricket team used to play the West Indian cricket team in Newcastle every year when we were at school. We wagged school a few times to go and watch the game at number 1 sports ground.
Yeah.
You'd stand there and get the autograph of Glenn McGrath, Steve Waugh, Mark Waugh, you name it. They were all playing for Australia at the time. Oh, yeah. So it kind of didn't feel like they were that, they weren't these removed people. Whereas these days it feels like it's impossible to get to anybody because they're such celebrities and high profile and that sort of stuff. So ultimately, having said that, I did meet David Beckham, and he is incredibly lovely. I got the chance to talk to him for good sort of 15 minutes, and he was definitely in the category of don't meet your heroes. He was in the very positively do meet your heroes, because he was awesome and couldn't have been nicer. He was at a charity fundraiser for the Hunter Medical Research Foundation, and he was interested in what was going on. He was polite to anyone who asked him a question. He gave myself and my colleague 15 minutes of his time, and I probably more adopted them later on. I love the fact that Mark Richards was from Newcastle and he was the world surfing champion. I love the fact that Craig Johnston was from Newcastle, from Lake Macquarie, and he became, a household name. I actually became friends with Craig and ended up having a drink with him. And he used to catch up with him for a beer when he'd come home to Newcastle, and we'd play in the Celebrity Golf Classic with Jack Newton every year. And,
nice.
Yeah, so it was, definitely, again, through the job, I've definitely had some doors open to me that were just, as a little kid growing up in Qatar, it was just incredible. The amount of times I'd send my dad a photo and just be like, Dad, I met Craig Johnson, or Dad, I met, Darren Beedman, the jockey, or Dad, I met, this horse trainer, or I'd take a photo with a famous horse or something, and, Dad would just be shaking his head, sort of living out his fantasies for him as well.
Yes, absolutely. When it was David Beckham, was that the time where Tinkler brought him out to play Newcastle?
Yeah, so I got chosen a few times through the job to be an ambassador for the city of Newcastle when sporting things happen.
Amazing.
And so when the LA Galaxy came to town, I hosted a few functions on behalf of the HMRI, and they were sponsoring the game, they were the shirt sponsor who was getting funds from the game. I was invited to the Welcome to Newcastle gathering, I guess you'd call it. The entire Galaxy team was there, so Landon Donovan as well, the famous at the time American captain. But it was mainly because a guy named Michael Bridges, who actually played with Harry Kewell and Mark Viduka in the Premier League, settled in Newcastle after he played for the Jets in the A-League. And I actually ended up becoming friends with Bridgie because he owned a bar on Derby Street. And Newcastle being Newcastle, if you've got half a profile, everyone tends to meet everybody. Yeah, Michael Bridges just became someone that I got to know, and I'd go for drinks at his pub or his bar because I knew him. When the function was on, I was able to say to Michael Bridges, Bridgie, how well do you know Beckham? He said, we played England under 21s together. And I said, you've got to go and get him, mate. I'd love to meet him. And he went over and grabbed him and just said, there's a couple of people that really want to meet you. Yeah, Michael went over and grabbed him and brought him over. And yeah, Kate and I got to meet him. And same thing happened. Newcastle hosted the Asian, some of the games in the Asian Cup in early 2015. And again, I was made an ambassador for the city of Newcastle. Yeah, got to meet the Socceroos through that. Tim Cahill and the crew at the time in 2015 that ended up winning the tournament. So yeah, it was very special. And yeah, funnily enough, got to go to the Wallsend Fair and try and drum up some publicity for the Asian Cup by talking on a stage in front of people. So
come on, the Wallsend Fair. Damn, I missed that.
Yeah.
Your co-worker, she was the first female sports reporter on NBN.
Yeah, so Kate was the first female sport presenter on NBN. So,
yes.
And it's interesting because as much as, and it was an amazing achievement and she deserves all the credit in the world, but it's interesting because it wasn't necessarily a bias at the time against a female because of being a female. It was actually the reason they were always giving was logistics, because in order to get people on air for the news, to put everybody on air, you have an hour and 15 minutes for female makeup, and you have about 25 minutes to 30 minutes of male makeup. So yes. the thing was, the schedule was worked out always because the sport presenter was a man. So the thing was, you had to be in the chair to pre-record and do everything you had to do by 5 o'clock. So you had to be in the makeup chair at 4:30. The problem was, in order to fit Kate in, which is what they did eventually, and that's what they always should have done, but they ended up having to move the makeup times by half an hour. So everybody had to move, which in the end wasn't a huge imposition on anybody, but it was just something that in the past they tried to sort of say, look, makeup, it won't happen. But Kate was just the right person for the job. I've never met anybody who knew so much about so much that I just, was always flabbergasted. Like, she was, the amount of times she'd be up at, 2 a.m. watching Chelsea play in the Champions League, and, she'd get to work and I'd be like, you don't look like you've slept much. She's like, Chelsea played in the Champions League at 2 o'clock. So I got up and she's got a son, Roman, who I think he's about 8 or 9. And he is an incredibly good footballer, and he is incredibly obsessed with football. Yeah, they get up together and watch a lot of things together. So, yeah, Kate was amazing. She was right place, right time as well, because she was in the mix. And then the person who was at the time the second in charge, he left to move to Sydney. Yeah, we pushed for it, and it became a reality. And yeah, she absolutely was just a revelation, and is proof that for all of the, so often in me covering sport, I would always get this negative voice telling me, don't do female sport, don't cover female sport, what a waste of time, it's this and that. And I'd always say, rubbish, that this is crap, and they'd always say, the level's not very good. And I'd say, look, it's chicken and the egg. If you don't give women the facilities, the time to practice, the money, the exposure, they're never going to get any better. So let's give them the exposure and let's see what happens. Exactly. So but what the proof is that the more we gave the female teams and sports and individuals publicity, the more people would reach out to us and say, how amazing is that Rhiannon Iflin, who's the world cliff diving champion, and she's won it 6 years in a row. How incredible is that Lauren Parker, who's the world champion Paralympic cyclist, and, all this sort of stuff. Yeah. But since Kate became a sport reporter and a sport presenter, the amount of times when people want her to be the person who hosts their function, you could clone her and she still couldn't host enough functions in Newcastle. She's just that good and that does that many. So yeah, it took a long time, but when they finally got there, they definitely picked the right person, and she grabbed it with both hands, and she ended up leaving in the end for the same sort of reasons as me, just that she's got a daughter, both in primary school, and I think it was just, you just realised that, she was working Tuesday to Saturday, I was working Sunday to Thursday. You just started missing so much stuff, and for her, she moved into PR as well, but she's still so heavily involved she's on the board of Newcastle Cricket. She's she's heavily involved, and she's just amazing at what she does. So yeah, I couldn't have been happier to have her as the person I worked with very closely for, like 14 years. So yeah, yes. Absolutely.
So also our connection is, and you told me before that you actually did karate with my father.
I did, yes. That was...
How did that all come about? How did you go from basketball and cricket to karate?
Well, this all happened before that.
So
I was probably... I was probably only 10, 11, something like that. And I think my dad thought that I was just built like a pencil and wanted to make sure I might have been able to defend myself. And I think Dad was a fairly tough person and could handle himself, and he just knew I was just built like a feather, and was never going to be able to do that. So he tried to get me into this Kempo Khan karate, and took two of my mates along, and eventually one of the boys that I went with, his younger brother, came. It just so happened that the karate dojo was pretty much 20 meters down the road from my nan's house, and my dad used to take us, and because of Dad's relationship with your dad, so Johnny, as he was called by my dad,
yes.
They were just good friends, and they were sweeper and goalkeeper in a football team together, and Dad had a real affection for Johnny, and I just think it was something where Dad thought, well, this is a friend of mine, I trust him, I'll send Mitch along, and and these friends of mine must have been interested as well, and but I think, to be honest, the attraction was, to start off with, Dad used to drive us to Nan's house, and we used to go to the karate, and then we'd go back to Nan's and she'd give us a bottle of Coke and a Kit Kat, and I think that was the attraction for the three of us at the time. Because when my mate's parents started taking us, there was no trips to Nan's, so it was only every third week you end up getting the Kit Kat and the Coke. So
right.
Yeah, but I can't say I did it for very long. I think I got to yellow belt, and I did my first session where you actually went and fought against people from other dojos and all that sort of stuff, and I think it just scared the crap out of me, and I don't think I ever went back after that. Yeah, I think I went more hardcore into the cricket and the soccer, and then obviously the basketball after that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you finished high school and you went to the Newcastle University. A film, right? Video editing?
Yes. I got an average mark, let's say, for the HSC. I constantly tell people that I unfortunately discovered sport, girls and friends when I was about 16, which was pretty inconvenient timing. I think I just enjoyed it too much, the freedom of mates getting licenses and, having that freedom to go and do whatever you wanted. Yeah, got decent marks in high school and just never really got the mark I needed. So, no, I did environmental science for 6 months and hated it, and dropped out, went and worked with Dad for 6 months and wasn't any good at that. And then I went back to uni and did arts. And when I got into arts, I actually started in some fairly simple things like history, geography, because I was trying to get my marks up to get into journalism. I picked film thinking it would be something where you just went and watched movies and, it'd be easy. Turned out it was the thing that pretty much, it became what at the time was probably my second love, and has probably grown to ultimately become my first love. Discovered film studies and ended up doing majoring in film studies, but also because of my credits through arts. When I got into communications 2 years later, I ended up majoring in journalism, history, and film. So, and then within the communications degree, I was able to do video editing, which then led me to get the job at NBN. Yeah, that was sort of my window into it. It was learning video editing at university, and then that got me the job at NBN.
So did you know anybody there at NBN, or was it just like a normal interview? Okay,
come on, mate. It's Newcastle. How do you think I got the job?
Friend of a friend?
My best female friend from high school, her older brother happened to be the best mate of another mate from school's older brother. And I was kind of in the group with this friend. Oh, actually, the friend ended up being a bit of a name drop here, but Ben Melmoth, who played basketball for Australia and was the Newcastle Falcons centre and Pirates and all that sort of stuff. So Benny and I are good friends. Benny's younger brother, Adam, played for the Pirates eventually as well. He's one of my best mates. Through that group, this friend of mine, Brooke, her older brother, Corey was best mates with Ben. Ben was the older brother of Adam. Adam and Brooke were two of my best friends. So I knew Corey. Literally, when I got into comms and started doing editing, he just rang me one day and on the landline, because it was 1999, and said, or 98 actually, and he said, they've got an opening for 4 hours a week as an editor. Are you interested? Yeah, he taught me the ropes and took me about 2 months. And then, they just had a few openings and I just kept getting more and more shifts. And I sort of was able to add on to it. So you start out as an editor 4 hours a week, and then they say, hey, do you want to come down and do auto cue? It's $20 an hour and you do 4 hours and you can still go to uni. And you're like, yeah, great. And then they're like, do you want to do some graphics? And you're like, yeah, sure, I'll do that. Do you want to do some, captions and type it out? And I'm like, yeah, sure. So I just ended up doing every job that they threw at me in the whole newsroom. But yeah, the initial window into the job was definitely brother of a friend.
Right. And then 99, it seems like a lifetime ago. It would have been so much changes from then till up until you left. So editing, like the film, like doing all the video edits to what they do now. So what were the major differences that you saw in your time?
Yeah, well, so 99, NBN was still editing on a form of video called Betacam. So everyone knows VHS, but if you're as old as us, you remember that there was a time when videos were either beta or beta, them as Americans call it, and VHS. And VHS was actually the one that won the sort of video wars to become the one for home video, but Betacam was actually the best video quality for shooting. So if you ever saw a TV news crew, they were actually using Betacam. So we were editing on Betacam, and it was these two huge chunky machines, probably about 40 centimeters wide, and with a tape that was about 25 centimeters wide. And you just used to stick that in and you'd edit from machine to machine. And that lasted until about 2002. Then they moved on to DV cam, which was kind of an HD version, but we weren't broadcasting in HD. So that was still tape to tape. And then by 2000 and I think it was about 6 or 7, they moved on to computer editing for the first time. So, Grass Valley, Adobe Premiere, that sort of standard editing software these days. Just the formats where, timelines were, you're cutting on a timeline, you were looking at the video waveform and all that sort of thing. So that probably changed, around 06, 07 for NBN. And then it was only literally probably 2021 where NBN became fully integrated into the Channel 9 system, which has a program called Avid, which is like a file sharing system where they share all their vision throughout the entire network. And essentially there's they shoot on things now called XD cam, which is essentially like a high resolution disc inside a plastic casing. It will shoot and create clips that are kind of like MP4 format. So when you put it into a player, it just dumps it down as if it's like a video file, and then it goes straight onto the computer and it's just able to be edited like that. So in terms of the quickness, in terms of everything, like go back to 1999, if you knew that, a guy from Newcastle was surfing in a contest in America, unless somebody knew somebody that could get you footage, there was just no chance of getting it. You just knew you weren't going to get that footage unless there was some sort of, American station that was going to relay it through the bureau of NBN or Channel 9 in the LA to Sydney. It just wasn't going to happen. These days, turn YouTube on. There's a program where you just basically download the program and convert it, or turn YouTube on. There's a thing called screen capture where you just literally put a box out, hit record what's on the screen, dump it down to the system. It's there for you to use. So coverage of sport these days, it's actually probably the saddest thing is that if you go back in time to before the internet, everyone relied on TV news because, they just knew if you were going to get footage of something, it was going to be on the TV news. These days, Surfing New South Wales will put out their own video of a contest. If the contest is on in Tahiti, they'll have a live stream of a YouTube clip going. If it's a golf tournament, they'll have a live stream, all these sort of things. So the saddest thing is in this day and age, they can collect so much more vision. They can collect so much more information. They can give you so much more product, but ultimately you can almost find it yourself if you really wanted to. So it's sort of, the opportunity is there to provide a lot more content, but it also means that if you're specifically just interested in surfing, you're not going to turn the news on just to look for your favorite surfer, because you can find them yourself on the app. Yeah, it's that was probably my biggest disappointment, was that we could pump out so much more content and give the viewers so much more, but if they specifically wanted one thing, Knights fans weren't coming to us for necessarily the Knights vision. They're going straight to NRL.com. Jets fans are going to the A-League website. Surfing fans, WSL app, that sort of thing. So I think, there's still the rusted on viewers, but there's also, that chance that you kind of have to give people something they can't get. And that's the hardest thing. Yeah.
Yes. What amazing technology that we live in, right? So when did you get your first break for being on camera? 2009, was it?
Yeah. So as a journo, when I started in 2004, I did a couple of months in Newcastle. Then I moved up to Tweed Heads and I ran a bureau up there for about 8 or 9 months. And then the rest of the time it was a Gold Coast bureau with some other journalists.
Mitch, can we get backtrack there? I read that your first interview they actually did was with Catherine Britt.
Yeah, it was.
Also. Yep.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, so that was interesting. So her manager called the newsroom to say, my client, I guess, has just recorded a duet with Elton John. And we were kind of like, oh, right. And they were like, yeah, she just lives in, I think it was Eleebana or something at the time, or Cahaiba or something. And I was like, and we were like, oh, and I took the phone call and I went to the chief of staff and said, oh, this has come through. It's a story. And he's gone, do you want to do it? And I hadn't voiced a story yet. I hadn't written a story yet. I'd only gone out with people and I knew the process, but I'd never done it. And he sent me out by myself with a cameraman, did the interview, wrote the story, gave it to the producer, and the producer called me over and he said, who helped you write this? And I said, no one. And he goes, mate, that's pretty good. And I was just like, really? And he goes, yeah, I'm not going to change a word. Yeah, go and get someone to voice it. And he went straight into the news director at the time and said, because at the time I'd actually been given the opportunity through the news director. The news director had said to me, because I'd done some camera work as well, and he said, if you want to be a cameraman or you want to be a journalist, I'm going to give you 3 months. And at the end of that 3 months, you come and tell me what you want to be, and we'll see what openings we've got for you. That was probably 3 weeks in, and the producer went straight to the news director and said, he writes really well, let's make him a journalist. And
that's incredible.
And that was it. So 2.5, so that was late March, early April 2004. And by July I was moving to Tweed Heads to take on an office by myself.
Yeah, right. And how long did you stay there in Tweed Heads?
So that job lasted just on 2 years. So it was about 9 months of the Tweed Bureau, which was based at Coolangatta Airport. And then they expanded it from 1 journalist and 1 cameraman to being 3 journalists and 3 cameramen, and to be the Gold Coast Bureau. Yeah, I was there from July 2004 to just under 2 years, June 2006. So then moved back to Newey, and moved back to Newcastle. You sort of you became, you did news, you did sport, you did some producing, you did some chief of staff work. You tried to do everything. Probably around 2007, where the boss at the time said, look, go downstairs and just have a go at reading on air. Like, it won't be on air. But just have a go. Just familiarize yourself with the studio and familiarize yourself with the camera and the auto cue and all that sort of stuff, and the pedal for the auto cue. And so I did a few of them, and it was probably early to mid 2008, where we used to do live updates where you would read the update to the camera at 12, 1, 2, 3 o'clock.
Oh, yes.
They were just a 1 minute update where you'd be watching, I don't know, Young and the Restless, and that would come on in the middle of it.
They're probably still doing Young and the Restless.
They probably still are. That was I probably did about 7, 8, 9 of those. And then it was pretty much late 2008 where the boss came to me and he said, look, I've looked at your tapes. I think you're ready. I got my first gig literally on New Year's Day of 2009. So I was a very good boy on 2008 New Year's Eve, and home in bed at 12:30. Yeah, up the next day and very nervous. Yes, my lovely brother saw the footage of me, and I had my hands sitting on the desk because one of my colleagues had said to me, look, if you get nervous and you get worried about where you are and where your head is and all that sort of stuff, just put your hands on the desk and keep yourself like so you know where you are. So where your hands are pointing, that's where your shoulders should be pointing. So my lovely brother called me as soon as the news finished, and here I was thinking I'd get all these phone calls saying, you did it, you're on TV, you didn't screw up. And my lovely little brother rang me and he said, why did they put your desk on the side of a cliff so you had to hang on to it for dear life?
Oh, dear. Come on,
Perfect.
it's your brother. Had to pick out the faults, you know.
Exactly. Exactly. Whereas my grandfather, Bob Frame, and my uncle, Greg Frame, went to the Soldiers Point Bowling Club and made the person running the bar turn every TV on in the entire bowling club to the news. So everybody at Soldiers Point Bowling Club on New Year's Day had to watch my ugly mug.
I recently saw it, and it was a good throwaway to you because it was Australian cricket. So of all the first thing to say, it was not a bad way to get into it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was funny because so NBN was based at Mosbri Crescent for 60 years, pretty much 60 years on the dot. It's actually being demolished now because they're building high-rise apartments where the footprint of the building was. Because what sort of happened is with streamlining and aggregation and everything, a lot of jobs through the Nine network have been moved to Sydney or Brisbane. So instead of having a studio crew now, we have there are automated cameras now. Yeah. So they've moved NBN News to an entire floor of a high-rise of a building in Honeysuckle. And so it takes up an entire floor. But it's gone from, back in the day, probably 30 years ago, there would have been 500 employees at NBN doing any number of things. These days, it's probably 50 in the Newcastle office, and it's all done out of the one building. So the old building is demolished. We actually packed up and left there just over 18 months before I left NBN. So I was there for the final night, and myself and Jane Goldsmith did the final broadcast out of Mosbri. But when I was cleaning up my desk, I actually found all this stuff that I didn't realise I'd kept, and one of it was 3 VHS copies of my first 3 nights on TV.
Oh, right.
So that's where that footage, that's why it looks all grainy and looks all like, looks like it's from 1960, not 2009.
Yeah, right. Wow. I saw where you were leading up to that stage and you got thrown out to do a story about a Wallsend fire.
Yeah, really close to Federal Park.
Right, Federal Park.
Yeah, so right off Federal Park, so you're heading towards the pool. Federal Park's on your right. It was a left-hand turn, one of those streets in there that's quite small, which would have been very original sort of suburb, like would have been, horse and cart sized streets. So anyway, I think it was around Easter, and a house had a house fire. And it was one of those ones where someone's put their fire on. They didn't get it checked before they turned it on. It's combusted and it's blown a hole in the back of the thing. And anyway, it was one of those fibro houses in Wallsend that was old. Excuse me. And I turned up with a cameraman, very inexperienced, had no idea what the protocol was. And unfortunately, my cameraman, who was a lovely guy, who was a bit older, just didn't really, handle himself in the best way. He literally walked past the people crying on the street corner about their house and gave them a big, how are we all this morning? Which made them very, very upset. And then 5 minutes later, he's gone and talked to the fire chief and said, do you mind if I go inside and get some shots? And he just trudged inside their house with mud on his shoes. And anyway, these people came running over to me and they were all upset. And they said, how dare you? You're the scum of the earth and all this sort of stuff. And I just said, I'm really sorry, but I don't know. I want to be a sport reporter and I don't know what I'm doing and blah, blah, blah. And unfortunately, even though the girl that I was talking to seemed to be nice and she did calm down, they called the station after we left and said, you didn't even send a real reporter, you just sent a sport reporter. So I got in a little bit of trouble, but it did make my mind up that I definitely wanted to gear away from news reporting. I just didn't have the stomach for it.
Yeah. And like you did it for so long. Like, how difficult was it to be so up to date with the sport? Like, you're doing it every day on the news.
Strangely enough, the longer you did it, the easier the job became. And I think that's what's been hitting me hard in this new role, because nothing comes easy in the new role because I don't know where anything is or who anyone is. Whereas in the old role, and I was just telling people this today, just when they asked how am I fitting into the new role, if somebody in the office came to me and said, Mitch, we need a contact for Golf New South Wales, I just get my phone out and just go, there you go. His name's David. Call him. Tell him Mitch said to call. And that was the guy for Golf New South Wales, not just Golf Newcastle, but, the entire state, but they knew. And the thing is, the industry, this is the disappointing thing about media, I guess, going forward, is that it's such a transient industry these days that what used to be good about it was that journalists were in place for a long time, so that when a media person knew who the journalist was, they found it easy to just be like, oh, we've got a media op coming up at this venue. Who's the journo? Oh, Mitch at NBN is the sports guy, call Mitch. Like, my contact at Venues New South Wales used to work for the Sydney Swans, and then when he moved to Venues New South Wales, he just knew that it was still me. And so he'd ring me and say, Mitch, we're bringing a motocross event to the, McDonald Jones Stadium. It's on next Thursday. And I'd say, great, thanks, mate. I'd get off the phone, put it in my diary, know that it was on, and it'd get covered, and you just think, then I'd get a phone call from the Golf New South Wales guy and say, hey, Mitch, one of the kids from Charlestown's winning the New South Wales Amateur in Sydney. Do you want some footage? And I'd say, yeah, mate, send it through. And it became very second nature, and you just always knew you had content. And as I said before, just like so many of the people became like mates. Like, I was doing interviews with Kurt Fearnley, the wheelchair athlete, by the end of his career. Kurt and I were going for a coffee to do our interviews because it was just me and him catching up. Like, I'd literally just say, Kurt, I'll meet you on Beaumont Street. I'd shout him a coffee. We'd have a coffee. The cameraman would have a coffee. As soon as we'd finish, we'd put the camera on. We'd do our interview. I'd say goodbye. You'd use file vision, and that was it, And it was just a simple. Things got a lot easier too because, text messaging. If you know an athlete well and they've got your number, it was just easy just to text and be like, hey, mate, you got 10 minutes on Tuesday to do an interview, And that's what I loved about most sports people in Newcastle. Like, there are girls that play rugby for Australia, and they just work down on, Derby Street, but they play rugby for Australia. But if you text them and say, hey, can we do an interview on Tuesday? They say, yeah, I'm working that day. Come down and we'll do it in the office. And the disconnect with the people like in the NRL is probably the saddest part of it, because when I first started, and probably up until 2012, you could build a rapport with players and you could actually establish a rapport. You could have their number, you could text them, you could talk to them, you could ask them a question and look after them, and you could be a journalist in the truest sense of having them as a contact.
Yes.
It's completely been managed now so that you're just not allowed to have a relationship with the players, because you're just not. They just don't want the publicity getting out there without the club's approval. Whereas I can be friends with an individual, or I can be a contact with an individual, a surfer. Like, Ryan Callanan's from Newcastle. He's been top 10 for years. He's just a guy that I know well enough that it's in my phone. If I walk down to Merewether Beach to go for a swim on a day off, or, with my kids, I stop and give him a hug and, sit and have a coffee with him. He's not, he's not someone that you sort of think, oh, I'm not allowed to talk to you because you're famous. It's just kind of like, well, he's just a kid from Merewether who surfs well,
Yes.
So it was still my favorite thing to know that you could just hang out with these people. There are extraordinary athletes doing extraordinary things. And that was the nicest thing when I finished. Rhiannon Ifland's the 6-time Red Bull cliff diving world champion and 3-time gold medalist high diver. And she sent me the loveliest message and saying, I'm going to miss you and thanks so much for everything you did for me and all this sort of stuff. And yeah, so I think that connection with the people that I've always dealt with was lovely. But it was just probably, it was getting a bit harder towards the end with the more professional teams. But in terms of the information overload, it was probably just more that it was full time. You just, you'd roll out of bed, you check Twitter, you check Facebook, you check your email, you check your phone. But 20 minutes later, you'd checked everything and, you were up to date and you could go about your business. And then you knew what you were doing, you knew where this person was racing and who was doing what, and you had enough good contacts that would call you and tell you when stuff was on. So it actually became incredibly easy. But as I said before, the volume of stuff became so much more that you're almost picking and choosing what was the most worthy thing. Whereas go back 10 years, you'd have been struggling to find 4 minutes worth of content 7 days a week. These days you could do 10 minutes worth of content every day just with the availability of footage from people around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that that's going to become a problem, Mitch, with more sports becoming professional, more money in the game, more sponsorships, like you said? Or is it just maybe because we live in Newcastle that it's not going to become like that, maybe like the US, for example? What's your opinion on that?
It's an interesting one. I read an article from one of the journalists in the Sydney Morning Herald probably 2 or 3 years ago that really struck a chord with me. He said he was trying to cover the state of origin in New South Wales and he couldn't get access to one of the players from Cronulla. And they were trying to hide him because he had some strapping and he'd written something stupid on his thing in support of some guy who'd gone to jail or something.
Oh, yes, I remember.
And this journalist couldn't get access to him as part of the New South Wales State of Origin camp. This same journalist then flew to America, got accreditation, and could talk to LeBron James, Steph Curry, Matthew Dellavedova, Kevin Durant, you name it, because the NBA says, you know what, you're a journalist, you're accredited, you get access to whoever you want. And these players come in and they have to talk to all the journalists because publicity is money, and money is king when it comes to these global sports. Right. So I think it's interesting that the US probably is more extreme in terms of the profile and the publicity and the celebrity of those players. But in terms of allowing journalists to maybe get a different angle, that's the thing. Like you go to a press conference these days and it's like everybody sits in the same room, talks to the coach, and you can't get a different angle. So you can't go and say, okay, my story tonight's going to be about how the Knights coach wants to institute this policy, because everybody knows what the Knights coach was saying about that sort of thing.
Got it.
So for me, it's not just losing the access to the players and the access to the coach. It's more the personal, the one-on-one time where you would have had the chance to go and sit with them and have a chat to them and, really try and suss out. And that's where I loved those stories. Like I loved the more in-depth Inside Sport magazine, 3 pages worth of story rather than the clickbait. And I think it's what I was never into it. I was never into the, gotcha journalism, oh, you said the wrong thing, I'm going to use that as my headline. Like I prided myself on, if I felt like the angle was going to be bad or the player was going to be bombarded with silly questions, on being able to talk to the media advisor and saying, hey, this player's probably going to get, stick for this or this or this, do you want to give them the heads up? Because I thought, well, I want to talk to that player next week and the week after and the week after.
Yes.
I don't want them doing an interview today going, all the media are crap, I don't want everyone to talk to you again, go away. So there's definitely a balance. But again, Newcastle, as you said, it's a one-team town. So a lot of the time you just can't burn people for the sake of one story, because that'll be the last story you ever get.
That's right, yeah. Mitch, I know you interviewed so many people. Are there like 1 or 2 standouts that you just come to mind and go, wow?
There were definitely some bad ones that stick out.
Oh, bad ones.
There was a couple of rugby league players who just didn't like the media, and you tried to ask them a question and they'd just be like, yep, nah. And that was the end of the interview.
Was it Darius Boyd?
Yes, it was. Very interesting time to be a journalist when the Knights were owned by Nathan Tinkler and Wayne Bennett in town.
Absolutely. Steph Gilmore. Yeah.
Go back through it and literally I was just so lucky at times. Like I did Mark Occhilupo's retirement press conference up on the Gold Coast. I did Steph Gilmore's first big interview when she got sponsored by Rip Curl well before she became the world champion. Just right place, right time. I interviewed Ben Simmons. He came to Newcastle to play. He played a game with his college team when his high school team. He was finishing high school in the US. He came back to play a combined rep team made up of Newcastle, Lake Macquarie, Central Coast and Maitland and Mid-North Coast players. And they let 2 people interview him after the game, and I was one of the 2. Actually, in that farewell clip on the news, there's a shot of me standing up shaking his hand. You name it, like Chad Reed, I got to interview a bunch of times. He was like world champion Supercross. Kelly Slater I interviewed tons of times when I was working up on the Gold Coast. He was there every year, in Newcastle as well. Golf, I interviewed Jason Day when he won when he got beat in a playoff in 2005 for the Queensland PGA title on the Gold Coast by a guy named Scott Gardner, who was Australia's first Indigenous golfer to ever make the PGA Tour.
Wow.
And Jason Day got beat in the playoff, and that was like, who's this kid? But I knew Scott Gardner, and I interviewed Scott. And then when I got back to Newcastle, it was just incredible the amount of people that were, when they came through Newcastle, I guess because Newcastle only has the one TV station, that you got to interview them. Even now, like knowing Rhiannon Ifland, who's the world champion, knowing like Emily Van Egmond and Claire Wheeler are just two girls that came up through the ranks playing junior football in Newcastle, and now they're two of the biggest stars playing for the Matildas,
Yes.
Kurt Fearnley, it's just great to know Kurt, and he only lives 2 blocks away from where we live in Hamilton. And Lauren Parker, her story is amazing, paraplegic, and what she's been able to achieve since then, and just knowing Lauren as I do, just from being around Newcastle. Christy Dawes, another Paralympian. Even Ryan Callanan and Jackson Baker are two of the loveliest kids you'll ever meet. They're 2 kids from Merewether. Ryan lost both of his parents to sudden stroke and cancer and that sort of stuff within the space of 18 months. The kid wasn't even 30 and he lost both of his parents. Yet he made the world tour, and he's just he's probably the one guy that I always celebrate his successes the hardest, because I just think I couldn't do it. I couldn't have done it. If mum and dad had both passed away when dad passed away, I'd be an absolute wreck, and I was 40 something, versus Ryan was in his late 20s, or his mid 20s, and then Jackson Baker, he's another kid from Newcastle. He's on the World Surfing Tour. He lost his mum to breast cancer 4 years ago. And I think, 23, 24, losing your mum to breast cancer. And, and again, you grew up and people had this perception of surfers of being, lazy, weed smoking dropouts. Nothing could be further from the truth. These kids are in the water for 10 hours a day. They're in the gym. They're eating healthy. They're exercising. They're sacrificing to pay to go to this event and get this board and everything. So I think I'm just always impressed, I think, by all these people and what they achieved. And I've held Olympic gold medals. I've held Olympic silver, bronze. Com Games gold, silver and bronze. I've held the America's Cup, the Sail GP title, the Hyundai A-League trophy, the NRL Grand Final trophy, the Melbourne Cup trophy. It's incredible. It's just crazy to go back and think about all of that sort of stuff. Yeah, bizarre. As I said, I was just a little kid from Katara who didn't have a hell of a lot of confidence, who somehow ended up in one of the highest profile jobs in northern New South Wales.
There you go. Absolutely. So what's the future for Mitch Hughes?
Mate, it's probably a bit out of left field, but to be honest, I would actually, as I was saying before, film sort of became my first love, and a giant percentage of what I did moving on to this job was to try and spend more time with the kids and my wife and the kids, or my little family.
Yes.
Doing the new job, being home, having dinner with the kids, they're in bed at 7:30, 8 o'clock, it gives me the chance to do some other things. So I don't know whether it ever comes off or not. I'd love to be able to do some things, and writing is one of the things I'd love to do, whether it be a book or whether it be film scripts. As you know, we have a mutual friend in Yasser who works for Disney, and being involved in the industry, I like to pick his brain. And I'm a member of the Newcastle Film Society, and I've been lucky enough to meet a lot of people in the industry, some filmmakers, some producers, some directors, some writers. And if I ever, get off my butt and actually finally do it and commit to it, I'd really love to be able to put some of my ideas onto paper. Yeah, I think the theme for me is, work is work. I'll work to live. I'll spend time with the family. Sport becomes something from now on that just becomes, a hobby. I get to play it or watch it. I don't have to be so invested that I have to live and breathe it. And then movies just become my passion, because I love watching them. I love reading about them. I love behind the scenes stuff. I love trying to write them and things like that. So to be honest, I'm hoping that within the next couple of years that I would love to be able to put something together. That would be the theme. My wife is just pretty much starting out on her career as a boss in medicine.
That's amazing.
Want to support her, I guess, in her journey now in terms of where she's going to go in the next 5 or 10 years in terms of being a boss. But yeah, I mean, yeah, in a nutshell, I would love to one day be known as Mitchell Hughes, who wrote that famous movie or that famous book, not just Mitchell Hughes, NBN News.
I think the whole book would be amazing. Social media, where can people find you online to catch up with you?
So I haven't been doing a lot of that because obviously I went from being a journalist and a lot of my stuff was journalist based. So I think I've changed my Twitter handle because I kind of had to, because I think it was Mitch Hughes NBN. I think it's now Mitch_J_Hughes.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given, Mitch?
My dad always used to say that it was easier to forget about something and let it go than it was to dwell on it and let it ruin your life. And I think it was a really good attitude because, yeah, it had that idea of like, there's no point burning bridges or, trying to, remember why you hate somebody or why you hate a situation or why holding a grudge, because you're spending so much energy on something that the other person may never even realize you were spending energy on. So
exactly,
to me, Dad was always about, just moving forward and trying to move on and not living in the past, I guess, which is.
Yes, absolutely. And what advice would you give to someone who wants to go into your field, like in the media?
I would say make sure you're doing it for the very right reasons.
Right.
I met a lot of people especially who getting into journalism felt like a side door into being on television. And
got it.
Broadcast journalism is an awesome outlet, but if the only reason you want to do it is to be a TV presenter, you miss the boat because there's so few jobs for TV presenters in journalism these days. You've probably got a limited amount in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide, and all the other jobs are gone. Most of northern Queensland used to do their own thing, maybe out of Cairns, maybe out of Rocky, maybe out of Townsville. Now it's either broadcast out of the Sunshine Coast or out of Brisbane back up to, the Sunshine Coast. So there's a limited number, and you're just going to find that your passion just isn't there to do the job. You're not going to persevere long enough to get into one of those roles because you're not going to enjoy it enough and you're not going to want to do it. It's a great profession, but be prepared to suffer through crap money for a while because it doesn't pay a lot. It will pay a lot if you get to the top, but it's a slow burn to get to the top. And if you want to get on TV, go and try acting because trust me, being a journalist and trying to become a news anchor is very, very difficult, and the jobs are very limited, and you won't last until you get to the top because those jobs are hard to come by.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I could imagine. Now, to finish off, I just asked some really quick questions just to get outside of what we've been talking about. You just give me your top 2 or 3 answers. All right, you ready, Mitch?
Ready.
Music. So who are your top 2 or 3 favorite musicians or artists?
I was a kid of the 90s, so I was obsessed with the early stuff of like the Chili Peppers, Soundgarden, Stone Temple Pilots, Nirvana, all that sort of stuff. To be honest, in terms of artists, I love Tame Impala at the moment. I love Billie Eilish.
Your 3 favorite books?
1984, only book I was ever reading where I literally threw the book away when I got to a certain point in the book because it just shocked me so much. There's a book called The Andron Report.
Last question. Who's your greatest inspiration/hero and why?
I'm not going to mention one person. I'll mention 2, and this sounds really, really sappy, but it's mum and dad. It's mum and dad, and it's mum and dad because dad and mum had good money. They were cruising. They were good. They knew what they were doing. And then when the recession hit in the 80s, they bought a business about 2 years before the business faltered because of the recession. They bought a delicatessen at a time when nobody had any money to spend. So no one's going out to buy salamis and, their own olive oil, like press their own olive oil and all that sort of stuff. So unfortunately, that business went really bad. But during that period, Dad would take second jobs. He would work for the guy next door. We would sacrifice the amount of times Dad did stuff that I just didn't realize, some of it illegal, which I won't say here, but like literally to make ends meet in the 1980s, my mum and Dad just did the most incredible things. And my favorite sort of story was Seal Rocks Caravan Park was 2.5, 3 hours away from our house in Newcastle. And it was this very rustic, very raw, very unchecked sort of caravan park and in the 80s and 90s. And Dad used to drive up there a week before we'd go on holidays for Easter, park the caravan in the best spot, drive home, not pay, come back to our house. We'd go back up there the weekend after. We'd stay for 2 weeks. And then at the end of the holiday, Dad would go to the counter to go and pay. And the guy'd say, "How long did you stay for, Brian?" He'd say, "Oh, just a week, mate." And he'd pay for a week and we'd leave because we couldn't afford to stay for 3 weeks. But Dad would somehow find a way to stay for 3. And then, Dad worked a second job fixing electrical appliances. And, then he gave up playing golf because he couldn't afford the fees to go and join the country club, and Mum went back to work earlier than she thought she would. And he just took crappy jobs and he just did what he could. But, they found a way to make ends meet. But I didn't know any of that until I was 20. And my mum was going nuts one year when I was 20 buying Christmas decorations. And I'm like, "Mum, what are you doing? I'm 20, bro's 17.
Yeah.
We don't care about Christmas decorations. What are you putting reindeers on the front of the house for and making a tree the size of the house?" And she's like, "Because I can." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" She goes, "We can afford it." And I was like, "What do you mean we can afford it?" She goes, "Mitch, did you never wonder why you wore hand-me-downs throughout the 80s? All your clothes were your cousin's clothes." And I'm like, "No, I just thought that's what everyone did, Did you ever wonder why your soccer balls were, ones that were left and lost and found at the club, or your boots were secondhand?" Or I'm like, "I just thought that's what everyone did." And I'm like, Mum and Dad found a way to make ends meet, but they didn't put that burden back onto us and didn't ever say to us, you never heard that sort of thing. Like later in life, when we were old enough and when we didn't care, Dad would say, "It costs $250,000 to raise a kid. You owe me $250,000. But
he had a sense of humor, your dad.
He very much did. But they never put the burden back onto us. And we lived in this awesome house that we didn't realize Mum and Dad almost lost, because of the recession. It had rumpus rooms, it had a massive yard and all this sort of stuff. And, we had holidays all the time because Mum would get a holiday through my nan to the Gold Coast through a timeshare. And then somehow they found money to get us to Port Macquarie. And again, I grew up thinking that I had the best life in the world. And then when I turned 22 and moved to England, I kind of went, wow, Mum and Dad never got to do anything like this. Dad went to New Zealand once, Vanuatu once, and Mum went to Hong Kong, I think. And that was it, and most of that was paid for by my grandparents on both sides. So yeah, Mum and Dad just worked so hard to give us a life that we, deserved. Mum even started putting money away for me when I was about 8 to go to university. I didn't know if I wanted to go to university. I was the first person in both sides of my family's ever history, timeline of the families, as far back to go to university.
That's incredible.
But yeah, Mum's awesome and she's still here and it's great to still have her. And
I think that's a great way to finish it off, Mitch. You've had a great career so far. Amazing life. Good luck with the rest of your career, your young little family. Represent Newcastle to the fullest, as I'm sure you will. And when I come back, let's definitely catch up and have a beer.
Absolutely. Sounds great.
Hi, I'm Tony Fair, founder of Victorian Grooming Company. Is your beard feeling dry or the skin underneath itchy? Maybe you'd rather soften and tame your beard instead. Our classic collection of beard oils, balms, and soaps will leave your beard looking, feeling, and smelling amazing. And if you prefer shaving, our pre-shave oils and shave soaps will give you a smooth and razor burn-free shave. Handmade in Edmonton with natural ingredients. Visit victoriangrooming.com.